The pursuit of happiness is not just a soft feeling of well-being or, gee, I'm happy. The pursuit of happiness has a much deeper meaning. It meant living a life well lived. And a life well lived meant seeking virtue, and the virtuous life led to a flourishing life. So in the modern homeschooling movement is really a return to that original founding ideal of what is a family for? It's to raise children. The biblical admonition is to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast, where our goal is to help you thrive in your homeschool journey. Let me take just a minute to ask you to please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen or watch, including YouTube. And if this podcast has been a blessing to you, please leave us a good review. Each review really does help. And be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. It is my joy to welcome back to the podcast a man who has spent his career on the front lines defending your freedom to homeschool, Jim Mason, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Since joining HSLDA in 2001 to lead the litigation team, Jim has represented homeschooling families in a wide range of challenging situations and has set precedents that have expanded freedom for the homeschool community. He's a graduate of Regent University School of Law, a veteran of the U.S. Navy who served on active duty in Operation Desert Storm, and he and his wife Debbie have homeschooled all 7 of their children through high school. Jim became president of HSLDA in 2022, and he serves as president of parentalrights.org. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. BJU Press Homeschool has a remarkable vision for homeschooling families, and I'm so grateful for their generous investment in the homeschool movement and their deep commitment to homeschool freedom. They are a true partner in this calling, and I'm honored to walk alongside them. Today, as our nation approaches the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, Jim and I are going to talk about something that is close to both of our hearts, the immeasurable value of freedom and why every homeschooling family should understand, cherish, and protect it. Jim, welcome back.
Well, it's always my pleasure to be with you on your podcast and anywhere else in the world, Zan.
We have been together a couple of times this year in various places. So we all know you as the president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, but there had to be a point where you and Debbie decided to homeschool, and you were just a normal couple like the rest of us. Tell us how you got into homeschooling those many years ago.
Well, so when Debbie and I got engaged and we were doing the premarital counseling stuff, she said, and she disputes this, but I have probably the better memory of the two of us. And so what I'm telling you is the actual truth.
The truth. Okay.
Yeah. When she listens to this, she'll phone in and give you her version. But before we got married, she said, when we have children, which I agreed with, we would have children, we will homeschool them. And I came out of the Navy, and I'd worked for trucking companies and kind of a single guy with not a lot of families that I knew about. I didn't know any children. I didn't know any babies. And how I was going to educate my children had actually never, ever crossed my mind until that very moment. And I had never really heard of homeschooling, but I could kind of figure out from the context what it might mean. And I could sense that a no answer could be a deal breaker.
Well, you didn't want that.
I didn't want that. So I said, okay, sure. And I also figured that, well, it's like 6 or 7 years off in the future, what's the harm in going along with it today? So then we had, our first child was born about 18 months after we got married. And as the time approached, I started actually reading about homeschooling. And I figured that we could give it, I was like, many, many homeschooling families. I was willing to give it a shot kind of 1 year at a time. And that's kind of how we got started. So we got married in 85. Luke was born in 87. And when he was 4 years old, which would have been about 1991-ish, so I was in this phase of kind of doing exploration. And when he was 4 or 5, I can't remember now, we went to a seminar. I actually took a day off or two from work, and we went to Portland, Oregon, for a seminar called The Writing Road to Reading.
Oh, we used that. I know what that is.
That's right. So, I learned to read before I went to school just by being read to. And I never, ever, phonics, I think they taught me phonics and all that stuff, but I never needed phonics. And to this day, I don't know that much about phonics, but the Writing Road to Reading was a phonics-based kind of approach to teaching reading. So I learned, and all those things, and we had flashcards. Anyway, and about that time, I started getting kind of interested and enthusiastic about it because, Debbie is kind of a born teacher, and she really enjoys it. And she, with the interacting with the kids and being there for those moments when, the light bulb goes off for them is infectious. It was about that time that we started getting, I'm really dating myself, the Teaching Home magazine. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
So the Teaching Home magazine had all these, model families on the front cover. And I knew that we would never aspire to being on the front cover of Teaching Home magazine. But on the other hand, it started, it had little vignettes about the homeschool freedom issues that HSLDA was working on back at the time in the early 90s. And when the magazine came to our house, we had kind of a fight. And I usually won the fight because I only read those little snippets. And the rest of the magazine, like 100 pages of it was how to homeschool and how to disciple your kids and all that stuff. Well, I was all about the legal stuff. And so I'd get it first and be done with it pretty fast. And then Debbie would read all the really important stuff. And that really started me thinking about really what the Lord was calling me to do. And that's actually what prompted me to kind of change careers towards a little later in life, heading off to law school. And
was reading the Teaching Home.
Yeah, well, it was. I would read those snippets, and I was actually in kind of adjacent to law enforcement. I was a parole and probation officer at the time, so I knew a lot of criminals, and I knew a lot of lawyers, and I knew all the judges in town. And so I was kind of in that world and reading the stories in the Teaching Home about, people's civil rights being violated, really got me thinking about making a career change. And
because you knew criminals and you knew these parents weren't that.
Well, I think I was in the legal realm. So I was adjacent to all of those things. And as a probation officer, there was our role was to help people as well as protect the community. And so when I was reading about what lawyers were doing, I knew every defense lawyer in my town, and I knew all of the prosecutors. So I kind of had it from both sides, and it just struck me as an injustice. And we were heading into our homeschool time, and it was still a time when we didn't know a lot of homeschooling families in our area. It was pretty small, and it just seemed like, well, if this could happen to somebody, across the country, why couldn't it happen to me or people in my circle? The kind of things that people were going through back then, and that's what really. I mean, it was sort of happenstance, actually. I had been recalled to active duty. I was in the Navy Reserves, and I was recalled to active duty and went to the Middle East. And at the time, I was a parole and probation officer. Our young family, Luke was just turned 4. And when I came home, that experience of heading to the Middle East, and I was in a logistics kind of role, not in combat, but I was all over the Persian Gulf. Been through the Strait of Hormuz many times, which is a timely reference.
Yes,
I guess.
it is very.
I have seen Iran from the bridge of a ship, but I came home and it was kind of a time of, I feel like the Lord might be calling me to something more, and I wasn't exactly sure what. And then I was reading all these things in the Teaching Home magazine, looking for Christian counseling programs. And as I scrolled past in one of the catalogs, it said, wait a minute, law school. There was a law school. So I went back, and Regent University at the time had only recently started a law school. And it was, in the Pat Robertson network of, so it was a Christian law school. And I thought, man, that's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? A Christian law school. But I read it, and then the Lord made it possible for us to take a trip to visit. And Debbie was skeptical, and during that trip, she met a professor who held a class for skeptical spouses, and she came away thinking it was actually a good idea. And we ended up heading to law school in '93. And that's how, and all of those things kind of came together, and it was indeed my ambition to one day come work at HSLDA.
So, and that was seamless, right? You wrote Mike Ferris and said, I'm here studying at Regent. And he said, well, I want to hire you when you get out of school.
Absolutely. That was exactly what happened, or not. So before we actually left, and we had made the visit, and I'd been accepted, but I was still, working as a parole and probation officer. I wrote him a letter and said, look, I got this great opportunity. I'm going to be going to law school at Regent University School of Law. It's a Christian law school, and, I've got a 5-year-old and we're going to start homeschooling. And when I finish, I'm going to come work for you. It wasn't quite that, but that's not too far off. He wrote me back a letter and he said, well, actually, we've got a lot of lawyers. We have enough lawyers. And my friend, who was the elected district attorney in our town, he was like, what are you going to law school for? There are too many lawyers, You want to do what? Homeschool law? What is that? What is that even about? But anyway, we went, and it was 5 years after I finished law school that I found out there was a vacancy, and the rest is history. That was in 2001.
Boy, you saw that dream clear through to the end, didn't you? I'm so glad you did.
Not quite the end. Wait a minute. I'm old, but I'm not at the end yet.
I'm not old yet. That's right. Oh, me. Well, so how long have you been at HSLDA then? Since 2000? You just said
2001. So it'll be 25 years
25
in
years.
August. Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's great. Well, we're so glad you were there. So before we move on, and we need to do that in just a minute, I love the story you tell about your son bringing his girlfriend home to meet the homeschool family.
So my oldest son, Luke, went off to college, and he had worked for a few years, and he'd gone off to college a little bit older. And when he started attending the what we call Crew now, but what we used to call Campus Crusade, and he met one of the staff person was a single young woman who had been raised in Christian schools her whole life. And when she found out that he had been homeschooled, and where I worked, in professional homeschool land, she was like, oh man, I'm really worried about this. And, you seem normal, she said to Luke. Luke's not exactly normal. He's a little bit of a renegade-y kind of a guy. He's a huge man with a huge beard and a shaved head. And one time when he volunteered to coach one of our kids' soccer teams. And he's just a big teddy bear of a guy, and kids love him. He's a great coach. But he showed up wearing a muscle T-shirt with and he's got tattoos, a big beard, And we were walking from the parking lot behind some other parents, and they were talking. It's like, who's that guy? What have we gotten ourselves into? Anyway, so he teaches at Laterno Christian College down in Texas as their strength and conditioning coach and athletic director. But he
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
That's great.
We Mason guys get a slow start, but we end up doing okay for the most part. So he was telling her, well, we're just a normal family. And she said, I don't know, homeschoolers, they're all weird. And that word filtered back to us. So when he was bringing her home to visit us for the first time, my 2 teenage sons decided that they would treat her to a demonstration. And they actually, when she came in the back door, they climbed out a bedroom window on the second floor, shinnied down. I don't know why. and they rang the doorbell to the front door. And when she was there and she saw them, they opened the door. They had suspenders on, and they'd hike their pants up to high water pants, and they'd slick their hair back, and they had a tray with several glasses of water and, a towel, and they'd had like bow ties, and they were like, it's a pleasure to meet you. May I interest you in a water, or perhaps a nice water, or a water? And she didn't get it. She thought,
she didn't get that it was a joke.
She was like, oh man. And she was kind of a little bit skeptical of us for a while until she had her first baby. And when she had her first baby, everybody in my family just loves babies. And so she is now probably my biggest fan. She's like a fangirl of the president of HSLDA.
And homeschooling her kids.
And so she started homeschooling her kids. She sent her oldest to a little Christian preschool, and Lucy came home one day, like 4 years old, and she was so excited about something she'd learned. And Joy said, wait a minute, I want to be there for that moment, when she learns that new thing. So now she's like a homeschool leader in her area, and she's just a huge homeschool mom now.
It is contagious. Homeschooling is contagious. So I want to take you back to February when you came down to BJU Press for us, BJU Press Homeschool, and spoke to our leadership summit that we do annually. And it was the 250th anniversary. It is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So I know you've spoken on this and written on this and done it so well. Jim, tell us why you think the Declaration of Independence is so important and why we need to celebrate it well this year.
Well, so it begins with, the unalienable rights of, all men are created equal and have the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when the Declaration of Independence was first signed and published, the big news was, here's this upstart country declaring independence from the world power of Great Britain. But the bigger, longer lasting news was this declaration that all men are created equal, by their creator, and have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so the pursuit of happiness, then kind of the thesis of my speech that I gave down there is not just a soft feeling of well-being or, gee, I'm happy. The pursuit of happiness has a much deeper meaning and what the founders meant when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, because, John Locke said life, liberty, and property. We have a right to life, liberty, and property. And they changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because the pursuit of happiness was, for them, something much deeper. It meant living a life, a life well lived. And a life well lived meant seeking virtue, and the virtuous life led to a flourishing life. And it has really deep philosophical roots going back to Aristotle, and from Aristotle to Aquinas to the Enlightenment. It really resonates because this pursuit of happiness and how you live a life well, and how do you live a virtuous life, and what is human flourishing really about, begins in the family, and it's taught by example. It's not book learning, as they say. It's a lot of it's life experience. You learn how to be virtuous by being presented with challenges and being shown the right way to respond to those challenges. And so, in the modern homeschooling movement is really a return to that original founding ideal of how do we, what in our families, what is a family for? It's to raise children. The biblical admonition is to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. How do you do that? You do it while walking in the way, while all of the things in Deuteronomy. It begins in the family, and we can lose sight of our roots in the founding if we don't really understand where they came from and what they mean. And so that was my thesis for the speech I gave.
Well, I love that. And I think we need to remember that how crucial the family is to the health and freedom of a country. And I really believe that's one reason the Lord has blessed the homeschooling community and movement so much. And I really just pray that families continue to hang in there and live this out. So, all right, I got another question for you, Jim. As I've traveled and spoken all over the country the last year or so, I keep hearing people say to me, okay, Zan, I know you had to fight for freedom when you started homeschooling, but there's no way we need to keep fighting for it now. We're not a target anymore because there's too many of us, which my feeling is that makes us a bigger target. But I want you to respond to that. Do we need to continue to work for freedom and worry about freedom and labor over freedom?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's an important question, and it's important that people understand how things have kind of changed and why it's still important. Back in the day, and the struggles that you went through in the 80s was because homeschooling was illegal or thought to be illegal, oftentimes incorrectly, it turned out. And people were being prosecuted, and direct threats to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in those days. And because of the struggles that you and others went through in those days, the work of HSLDA, the legal barriers were largely removed, so that the legality of homeschooling, where 50 years ago it was probably thought to be illegal in all 50 states, today it's unquestionably legal. But the struggle over the years has been to make sure that it's legal and clearly legal, and then to remove unnecessary barriers to the entry and the pursuit of homeschooling. And what the period we're in now is kind of, in many states, approaching maximum freedom. But the season we're in now, there are serious, committed, ideological opponents who want to roll back the freedom to homeschool as we know it today.
I've seen more threats to freedom in the last year that harken back to the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, than I have seen since 1992.
Yeah. It kind of began right before COVID, when Elizabeth Bartholet, a Harvard law professor, wrote an article for a law review where she called for a ban of homeschooling. And she used all of the tropes and stereotypes and negative things that she could possibly come up with in this law review article which didn't get a lot of attention until the Harvard Magazine did a profile in, I think it was in March of 2020, and the profile went viral. It was a magazine article that went viral. I first heard about it when I was going to bed one night, and my daughter, who was then about 17, my youngest, was reading it on her phone. And as I passed by, she kind of shoved her phone into my face and said, "Do you even believe this?" And she started reading me the choice passages. And so we actually engaged with that and wrote a whole series of articles that we later published in book form about where she went wrong. But so did pretty much the whole world. I mean, homeschoolers. She was apparently unaware that lots of Harvard students had been homeschooled, and lots of alumni and current students. She was on a board for international adoptions, I believe, with somebody who she considered a friend. And when the backlash started, she reached out to this friend and said, "Why are these people so mad at me? I mean, of course, homeschooling should be illegal," not knowing that the friend homeschooled. And that probably would have had a lot more traction back in 2020, but it came out, the magazine article came out in March, just before the world closed down for COVID. And so within days, almost the whole world had their kids at home and were trying to carry on education at home.
What timing? Don't you love it when the Lord does that? Yes.
But after COVID and so many people, I mean, a deluge or a flood of people leaving the public schools and discovering the joys of homeschooling, there was a backlash of, it started small. There was the Washington Post. They did a series, and Amazon Prime did a kind of an expose. Several pieces like that, and it started getting some momentum, so that today,
and these were negative pieces
about homeschooling. And the sad thing about it is, it tried to link homeschooling with abuse and neglect, and so that's what we're seeing today. That notion has gained traction, and legislation is being introduced all over the country, trying to make that link, and that's where we are today.
I've said it on the podcast many times. It is like they're taken. Parents have always been considered innocent, just like every other American, until proven guilty. But they want to start off with the fact that parents are guilty until proven innocent. Like they make some cut, or they've been vetted, and that's never been part of our jurisprudence as a nation.
Yeah, that's right, and that was part of the speech that I gave. This is a transition from the American tradition, understanding that part of the pursuit of happiness begins in the family, and the American tradition has always been that parents will act in the best interest of their children unless there's evidence to the contrary in a specific case. Then the Supreme Court and others have said that you have to presume that parents were acting in the best interest of their children. And this worldview is flipping that presumption, saying that, and it's really kind of it's most of the cases that they point to, none of the proposals would have prevented the things that had happened, and it puts every parent in the suspicious category. So every parent there's a bill right now in Nebraska that is making that link, and another one in Connecticut that's making that link. And it's sort of flipping the script from the presumption of parents acting in the best interest to we need to be suspicious of all parents.
And I think that happened in Illinois this year.
It happened last year in Illinois.
Yeah, 2025 in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I still haven't made the big jump into 2026, evidently. Yeah. So, all right. So this is this may seem like a random question, but tell us, I had never heard of him. Tell us who Victor Munoz is and why he's important for us to know.
Well, Victor Munoz is a political science professor at Notre Dame, and he wrote an article about the Declaration of Independence that was published in National Affairs last fall, that really makes the point that, the Declaration of Independence and the founding was based on the premise that I earlier talked about, that it was a startling proposition that had been introduced into the world for the first time in the American experience. We're the first country that recognized these truths that have led to our flourishing as a nation. Not perfect, but the Declaration of Independence was sort of the founding of a new thing, a new idea in the world. And the article he wrote was, very definitely recognizing that parents raising kids in a family, in a religion, is part and parcel of our American ideal.
One thing that you've talked a lot about, Jim, and I remember reading this in the court report in another article. If y'all don't know this, Jim Mason is a fabulous writer. And the first thing I do when I get the court report is read his article, because I always learn something. And so in one of your more recent articles, maybe 2 quarters ago, you talked about the clash of worldviews and how really what we're facing today as homeschooling parents is this clash of worldviews. And I want to read you this quote and then just get you to comment on it. Bartholet, who is the Harvard professor you were talking about, sees parental freedom as a curse. Munoz, echoing the founders, sees it as a blessing. To guide our children is not a right bestowed by government, but a sacred duty owed to the Creator. And I am so thankful that you introduced me to him and his writings, but your whole understanding of the Declaration has had a profound influence on me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. And so the founders did begin with a proposition that there are duties owed to a creator. So these unalienable rights that we cherish are those that the creator built into the world, and the duties we owe to our creator, whether we believe in a creator, whether we're religious or not. One of those duties is the duty of parents to raise their children to follow the Lord. And that means to nurture them, to care for them, to correct them, and to prepare them for their later life. It's a high duty. It's an obligation. It's not just a blank check of authority. It's a sacred duty that we owe to God.
Now, understanding the source of the clashes a little bit, tell us, if you want to, about a few of the things cases you have tried lately at HSLDA, or skirmishes you've had with local school districts, or things that you think are interesting to us that we need to know about, so that we can be aware that, we need to steward and nurture freedom constantly.
Well, so there's the old parable about the camel's nose under the tent. There are lots of examples of things that may seem small that when they occur, we at HSLDA treat them very seriously. One of the things that you learn in my job is that public officials, school districts, school officials, and others have a very high expectation that the homeschool family in their jurisdiction is going to follow the law exactly as written. They do not necessarily have that same high expectation for themselves. And so what sometimes happens is they decide that, gee, it would be really good if homeschoolers did this thing, whatever it might be, that's actually not in the law. So a few years ago, we had a case in Virginia where a local school district decided to pass a local policy to add to the state statute. And what they wanted was, in one sense, relatively small. They wanted the families to produce copies of proof of residence and proof that the child that they were sending a notice of intent in was their child, not in the law. But they thought it was a good idea, so they actually formally passed a policy. And when we challenged them on behalf of one of the families, they stuck to it. They said, no, we can do this. And we took that case all the way to the Supreme Court of Virginia. And the Supreme Court of Virginia basically said, no, unanimously 7-0, that the school district's desire for this additional information was not legal. We're dealing with something similar in Pennsylvania right now, where a school district, just by letter, sent out to all the families asking for additional things that the law doesn't require. Again, really easy to comply with. I mean, but it's also, there's a principle involved where if you allow, it's kind of a give the mouse a cookie kind of a principle. And that's why, we to paraphrase James Madison, he says you should take alarm at the first exercise on your liberty, because if you don't, it becomes the norm, and then the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, it's harder and harder to fight. So you take alarm at the very first infringement, and that happens all over the country, and it happens in ways that our lawyers handle this kind of situation almost every day, probably. Where the school districts often, they get a letter from us, they say, okay, you're right. And sometimes they say, oh, no, you're not right. So in Pennsylvania last year, they pushed and they pushed and they pushed, and they wouldn't relent. And so we actually filed a lawsuit against the school district in Pennsylvania for adding to the law. And even though we had given them every opportunity and in great detail explained to them where they'd gone wrong, please correct this. No, we're not going to. As soon as we filed a lawsuit, it was like, and I sort of had the impression that perhaps they didn't actually read our letters, and maybe after they got the lawsuit was the first time that they actually read the law.
Well, that happens.
Because they surrendered immediately and said, they wrote up an agreement that acknowledged that they don't have the authority to do this, they don't have the authority to do that, and they won't do it anymore. And that's the kind of thing that we push back against all the time.
I think, that may be one of the greatest gifts HSLDA gives the homeschool community that goes unrecognized, because you're stopping those little infringements that turn into bigger and bigger and bigger asks and really scourges on our liberty. Not to be too melodramatic, the more they grow, because they grow exponentially. And so I just want to thank you for that, Jim. I remember the first time I had this conversation with Scott Woodruff. He said, Zan, it's a principle called you don't give the government more than it's due, because we were dealing with something in South Carolina like that, a small thing, and people felt like they were rude not to respond well to the school district or, to the people asking for more. And he said, he stopped me. He said, no, this is how you explain it to people. So I really appreciate that safeguard on liberty that y'all have set, that because it's over small things, I think goes unrecognized, but is so foundational to our freedom. One of my favorite HSLDA stories is in 1992 in South Carolina, after the SCAYS law passed, and that was the organization, for those of you who don't know, that my husband and I started to take homeschooling out from under the purview of of the public schools, and we moved it to the private sector. And so the law passed in May, or it was signed by the governor in May of 1992. And we had a couple of school districts that just decided they weren't going to recognize the law because they didn't like it. And so there was this one in I think it was Dorchester County, and they just said, we're not accepting SCAYS. It's not valid. And we could have, I'm sure a letter maybe Scott sent a letter, I don't know. But we ended up D. Black, who was an attorney at HSLDA, flew down. Scott flew down. My dad, who's an attorney, went with me. And the three of them in their coats and ties, their suits, and myself went to this courthouse. It was a pretty small courthouse. And there was an assistant solicitor, evidently, who was trying to make a name for herself. And man, it was like killing a flea with a bazooka. But it made a point, and we didn't have that happen again. And, it was just that standing at the beginning so it doesn't get out of hand. And I'm such admirer of you guys at HSLDA. I can't thank you enough for all you've done.
And I think that message is a little bit harder than, people getting arrested for the simple act of homeschooling.
Yes, it is.
Especially with so many people new to homeschooling who aren't. So like when Debbie and I first started homeschooling, I wasn't super attuned to the small nuances of liberty that can lead to big problems when we first started. And there's a whole bunch of new people coming into homeschooling who weren't homeschooled themselves, who weren't brought up in this. And so we have a big mission to kind of educate people, because a lot of the things that are asked for that are not legal aren't hard at first.
Right. That's right. They don't seem cumbersome or atrocious or anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that we really keep an eye on now is that more and more homeschool graduates are facing issues in the workplace because there are more homeschool graduates. And so certain occupations make it difficult for homeschool graduates. They don't treat them as high school graduates without getting a GED. So we work pretty hard on behalf of a lot of adults, even years after they finish homeschooling. Just earlier this year, we helped a guy who he was a Navy Chief Petty Officer. And so that means, he's 15 years in the Navy. Probably. I mean, it was 12 or 15 years that he'd been in the Navy, and he was accepted into a program that if he went to a college for some classes, he could then go into an officer program. So here he is. He's been in the Navy. He's well respected. He's been recommended. He's a senior enlisted guy, but they wouldn't recognize his high school diploma because he had been homeschooled. And so we, along with the Navy Recruiting Command, went to work on his behalf and were able to get him in. But that kind of thing happens a lot more now, especially now we have a lot more homeschool graduates.
It does. We've had it happen several times here, and Will Estrada in South Carolina has gotten involved for us, because this is critical. If they can't stop homeschooling, but they can negate the validity of the diploma and the education that's happened, well, then they've outlawed it in that sense. And so, boy, that is so crucial. And I've appreciated, Will has been the vanguard. He is just right there righting this wrong. And I really appreciate that as an organization, Jim, you are willing to commit resources to these things that are post-homeschooling, but they're so crucial to homeschooling freedom. It takes such a love for freedom and such a love for families for an organization like HSLDA to commit to those kinds of things that don't have this, or ROI, return on investment. So thank you.
Well,
Thank
it's our
you
pleasure,
so much.
and I just would like to remind everybody that our attorneys were all either either homeschooled our kids, or were homeschooled themselves, or some were both. Some of our attorneys were homeschooled and are homeschooling, and so this isn't just our jobs; this is our calling.
And it's obvious. It's obvious. I had a question I was going to ask you about why does homeschool legal defense exist now that it's legal in all 50 states? But, I think we've covered that. And as we celebrate freedom through the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I want to thank Mike Ferris and you and the attorneys there, Will, who happens to be our attorney in South Carolina, for taking this stand, because freedom, the Korean War Memorial says freedom is not free. And I love what Linda Patchen from Idaho says. She said, it only takes us not showing up at the legislature one session for them to forget who we are. And so I think with the work of state leaders and the work of HSLDA, you are not letting school districts, you're not letting judicial situations stop the progress of homeschooling. You're not letting them forget us, because once, if we don't have that representative in the judicial system, we would have a hard road to hoe, and to help you give state organizations all of those things. Thank you.
Oh, well, one of the things that we really love doing is, homeschooling is it's a movement, and it's become kind of a mature institution in the education world and in the child rearing world. And it's kept alive in that sense by state organizations that year after year hold these rallies at state capitals. Whether there's good legislation or bad legislation, year after year, homeschoolers gather on the steps of the State House, go visit their legislators. And we, this year, our attorneys are going to 19 of those, which isn't as many as you're going to personally, but almost as many as you're going to personally. But that's just good old-fashioned American, how many of the state Capitol days have names like Apple Pie Day or Cherry Pie
Right,
Day?
that's right. That's exactly right.
Bring your family down, get a civics lesson, hear from your legislator, go visit their office, and that family then becomes the face of homeschooling for that legislator next year when a bad bill comes up. And that's just real get down into good old-fashioned grassroots work that is very effective.
That's right. And individuals, I can't say this enough, we as individuals need to know our senators and representatives. I mean, I harp on this all the time, but it puts a face with homeschooling, and we want them voting for people, not just for a cause or a bill. And I think that's really important too. I think one of the most meaningful assignments I've ever had in my life is when you allowed me at HSLDA to do that article on Capitol Day. And I spent probably over 2 years going to Capitol Days and interviewing legislators and interviewing state leaders and interviewing you guys at HSLDA. And it really, I was surprised, as many Capitol Days as I had attended, just through speaking and stuff, I was surprised to really learn how effective they had been. There were several laws, original homeschool laws, that were stuck, that were passed in the early days. North Dakota, Tennessee, there were several states, but they continue to be effective tools, and people can find that article. I'll put it in the show notes. You can link to that article. If your state doesn't have a Capitol Day, start one. Your HSLDA attorney will help you. Your state org will help you. Call them. We all need to be on our state house steps at least once a year.
Yeah, and I think we're at a bit of an inflection point, a turning point, where our ideological opponents who have a different worldview are gaining traction and momentum, and we have to be prepared to meet them honestly and forthrightly and without fear. Otherwise, we could lose the freedoms that we've won over all these years. We are seeing that across the country, these challenges, and these are no joke. And you're right about that. We don't need to be afraid, but we do need to be diligent. Right.
And we need to, I think it makes the anniversary of the 250th celebration of the Declaration even more important today, I think. So I want to ask you one or two more questions, but I have to tell you one of my favorite stories when I was traveling, because I asked people, especially when I'm at legislative days or state conferences, do you think your freedom is in danger? Do you think about freedom on a daily basis? When do you, so I ask all these questions. So maybe one of my most illustrative answers I got was from a girl who was an influencer, and she said, I'm online all the time. People see what we eat for breakfast. They see my kids do schoolwork. They know where I go in the afternoon. I live on social media. And she said, so what difference does it make when, elected officials, school district people can see what I'm doing every day if they want to. I'm not afraid of the government. And I thought, oh, we should be a little bit, of intrusion, not afraid of the government, but afraid of government overreach. So what do you say to that?
Well, it kind of goes back to basic civics. We believe in, the country was founded on the belief that limited government is best.
Yes.
It's founded in a traditional belief that the single most important institution is the family and the church and then local community. And, some of these statutes that are being proposed now, they, to correct one thing, they impose additional obligations on everybody. And that's just not how, that is the Supreme Court has actually said that approach to preventing bad things by requiring all parents to meet certain requirements is repugnant to American tradition. So we need to really understand what our American tradition is so that we recognize those things that are repugnant to American tradition. We need to stand fast on the liberty that we've inherited and not give in. That's sort of the insidious thing. We were talking about the, give a mouse a cookie or the camel's nose or take alarm at the earliest exercise. The insidious thing is that the tide rises slowly. And if you're not careful, you won't even notice it until it's up around your ears.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So take heart and really take mind of your freedom. Join your state organization. We just talked about this in our last episode. Join HSLDA and keep up with what's going on. So, Jim, I just want to ask you this question because I know you and Debbie so well, and I know you're people of prayer and God's word. Do you have a Bible verse that's been, or a chapter or passage that's been especially meaningful to you in your legal work or as a homeschool dad?
So I should have been prepared for this one. I think you asked that in writing. I always look to 1 John chapter 2. It says, we have an advocate before the Father, and that's Jesus. And that's really contributed to my calling, my life's calling, is remembering that, the parents in the homeschool world need to have an advocate. And that's what we are at HSLDA. We're advocates for homeschooling families.
Amen. And that is true. I have been the beneficiary of that, as I know thousands of families across the country have been. So, Jim, tell us how people can find HSLDA, join HSLDA. What do they need to do? You have a website, you have social media. What do you have?
You can go to our website at hslda.org and click on join or donate. Give us your support that way. Increasingly, donations play a bigger role in us, in our work. The dedicated, freedom-loving homeschool parents like you and I have mostly raised our kids. A lot of people who came through the early battles for homeschool freedom have largely raised their kids. And so if you want to support us through donations, that's more than welcome. As a member of HSLDA, we add your numbers to the numbers of people all around the country. And I don't know how many times I've heard people say, well, I've never had to call one of the HSLDA attorneys, thanking the Lord for that. But I'm always grateful to know that when the family across the country needed you, you were there. And so we think of ourselves as a mission-oriented organization that is here to preserve the liberty of homeschooling for future generations. So if you want to join with us, just go to our website, hslda.org.
Okay. Well, Jim, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for the work of HSLDA. Thank you for the work that you and Debbie have done. I love Jim's wife, Debbie. She's a prayer warrior, a homeschool mom, homeschool grandmom. She is just something else. So together, we sure do love and appreciate you.
Well, thanks.
And thank you all for joining us today. We know you've got a lot of choices of where you can spend your time. As always, you can find me at zantyler.com and on social media. And thank you. We pray that God will continue to bless your homeschooling community and your homeschooling family, and that God will bless America. Thank you.